9:30, and I'll call the first meeting of the new year to order, and the first item of business is adoption of the agenda. Do I have a mover? Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that the agenda be adopted as printed and circulated.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Having adopted the agenda, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof? Not seeing any. Minutes of the previous meeting. Do I have a mover? Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that the minutes from the December 18th, 2024 council meeting be adopted as printed and circulated.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So, single-timed item today, and we'll go straight on to that one. Public meetings and drainage meetings. Do I have a mover to go into a public meeting? Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that the council meeting be adjourned at 9:31 a.m. for the purposes of holding a public meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Planning Act.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And Spencer, as the planner for this report, do you want to highlight anything for council before I ask them for questions?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Ryan. Good morning to council, staff, and members of the public joining us here today, as well as those who may be joining online. The applications presented today are for draft plan of subdivision, official plan amendment, and zone change. They affect lands which are approximately 110 acres, and they immediately surround where we sit today. I would just highlight that the applications speak to a variety of housing forms and types, but they also speak to much more than that. The applications could facilitate the expansion of the existing village core of the village of Temsford. The proposed 2 central commercial blocks within the plan are looking to bring a future grocery store, as well as other users, to the village of Temsford. And there's an approximate 8-acre block central to the plan for a future elementary school. The applications today present an opportunity to not only help address a substantial need as it relates to housing, but they present an opportunity to not only to bring in a variety of housing forms and types, resulting in over 1,000 new residential units, but they also do present the unique opportunity to introduce key services and amenities for the residents of not just Temsford, but Zorra as a whole. The introduction of an 88-space daycare and the building we sit in today as the Zorra Municipal Office were early aspects of this plan. I just want to, before we get into the details of the report itself, I just want to highlight the importance of the teamwork that actually went into this report that's before council today. Former CAO Don McLeod, as well as numerous former staff and present staff today, have spent a tremendous amount of effort and time reviewing these applications and getting them to the product that's before you today. So that's very much appreciated. As far as the applications themselves, the application for official plan amendment looks to redesignate the lands, which are currently largely an industrial designation, but also a variety of other designations, including medium-density residential, low-density residential, and place them into low-density residential, medium-density residential, village core, and open space. So those are kind of the 4 key aspects of this plan, is the expansion of the village core, a low-density area, predominantly medium and a high level of medium-density development, and then open space for any corresponding blocks for either parkland or passive recreation spaces that will be dedicated to the township. The draft plan of subdivision proposes over 1,000 residential units in a variety of residential blocks. In the most northeasterly portion of the development are proposed for 2 blocks to accommodate mid-rise apartment buildings up to 6 stories in height. The official plan amendment itself does speak to increasing that from 4 to 6 stories, so that is a key element of the OPA application. As well, the draft plan of subdivision introduces the apartments, which would accommodate approximately 1/3 of the total residential units for the development, being approximately 372 units contained within apartments, over 600 in townhouse-style dwellings, and the balance being singles. A rendering of just for one example, a rendering of the back-to-back style townhouses is available. We can put that on the screen for council. This was not previously available. We just got this recently, so just an example of one of the townhouse types will be built within this development is shown on the screen for council. Street fronting townhouses that currently exist along Middleton are one other form of townhouse development that will also be included. The draft plan of subdivision also includes essential elements such as the park block adjacent to the stormwater management block, which does currently exist at the south end of this property, an open space block for a future trail, and additional lands which the owner will be conveying to the township for the purpose of establishing multi-use courts. And that's in front of the proposed school block shown on the plan. There are 4 new local roads being introduced as part of this plan, as well as the extension of George and St. Patrick Streets. With respect to the requested zone change application, I would highlight a few items for council's consideration. The lands will largely be placed into the R3 zone, but this would be site-specific R3 zones to accommodate both the apartment-style dwellings and the variety of forms of townhouse dwellings that are being contemplated at this time. The zone change will also place the large school block, being over 8 acres in size, into an exclusively institutional zone for the purpose of facilitating a future elementary school. There was a request I would highlight on the application itself to also include the ability to have residential units within that institutional block. Township staff and county staff from very early on have said we are not supportive of that. And as such, we are recommending, there's a difference in the report that council will note between proposed zoning and recommended zoning. So the 2 areas I would highlight there is the institutional block. We are not recommending that include the ability to have any residential units in it. Similarly, the central commercial blocks, the application did request that townhouse units be permitted within central commercial blocks, and staff have said that we would not be supportive of that in this application, as it effectively undermines the intent of the village core policies and the unique opportunity we have here to expand the village core, offer new services and amenities to the residents, not only of Tempsford, but Zorra as a whole. Aside from that, the provisions surrounding the R3 blocks we are generally satisfied with. There are reductions to frontage to accommodate narrower lots. There is a proposed increase in lot coverage. The lot coverage I would highlight as something that does require further consideration, and we do require, as we work through draft plan conditions, final sign-off from engineering to confirm that the swim block is adequately sized, for example. Township review engineer did provide comments saying that the increase in lot coverage would result in an increase in runoff being contributed to that existing stormwater management facility. There is a level of confidence that the block itself, however, is sized appropriately, such that if the pond needs to be enlarged, it can still be accommodated within that block. But again, we do have draft plan conditions to ensure that that remains the case. As a result of the public notice for this, we did receive numerous comments from public agencies and staff. Many of those do form draft plan conditions that are found alongside this report for council's consideration. And earlier on, we did receive a handful of phone calls and emails, very few, maybe 4 or 5 phone calls or emails from surrounding residents, and particularly at the time when the townhouses along Middleton were done. As a reminder for council, this is still essentially part of the same application. So council of the day applied this application only to phase 1, which is the townhouses on Middleton, and now this application is coming forward for the balance of the lands. Some of those questions surrounded issues such as the densities, the traffic, and the future uses. So there was an interest in knowing what might be located within a central commercial block or an institutional block, for example, that's comprising approximately 8 acres within the plan. As far as the PPS, the Provincial Planning Statement 2024, which is reviewed, all of our decisions shall be consistent with that document. There is a very strong focus in the latest version of the PPS on housing. Housing has become front and center in the new PPS, and as such, a lot of the language contained in that document speaks to the importance of not only providing housing, but providing housing in a variety of forms and types, providing it where appropriate, and most appropriately, ensuring that we're providing housing in areas that can accommodate it on full municipal services. I would highlight for council that Zorra is in the unique position that there is substantial capacity as far as water and wastewater due to Maple Leaf leaving the subject lands, that now we have an opportunity to consider applications such as that is before you today. The PPS also has policy direction regarding employment lands. Historically, the subject lands were utilized as employment lands by Cold Springs for a number of years. With the loss of that employer, staff did work alongside the proponent to ensure that we were introducing other blocks which provide for employment purposes. So we call them ICI uses, industrial, commercial, institutional uses. This plan does incorporate, again, that 8-acre block, approximate 8-acre block for the elementary school, as well as 2 central commercial blocks, which will host a variety of other, while not large industrial employers, they are still future employers for the community. So I just wanted to highlight that for council. The county official plan does have direction for development on in-service settlements, and it does recognize that increased densities may be considered by local council. So part of the reason that the OPA is before you today is to recommend the increased density for these lands. So the medium density range is provided in the report. The applicants are seeking to go beyond that range. We really don't, in our current official plan, we don't speak to any kind of high density development in the service settlements in our villages. We are looking ahead and looking at comprehensive reviews, and as a result of that, we do anticipate some change in the OP and some more flexibility as far as the ranges which may be appropriate to permit in the areas where the services can accommodate that growth. There was no change requested for the low-density area in the south end of the plan. I would highlight that for council. From a zoning standpoint, the site-specific zonings help us to achieve the densities associated with the corresponding OPA and subdivision. They'll work towards ensuring that a mix of housing forms and types are provided in a compact form in an area designated for growth on full municipal services. So in summary, the applications described in the report before council this morning represent a unique opportunity to shape the village of Temsford, expand the existing village core, introduce a variety of housing forms and types, facilitate the establishment of a new elementary school, a host of new commercial uses, and accommodate over 1,000 new residential units within a fully serviced settlement area. It is through development applications like this that we can successfully accommodate future growth, provide new opportunities, and ensure that we continue to protect our prime agricultural areas by removing the pressures for sprawl and by permitting the appropriate land uses in the appropriate locations. Lastly, I would just like to thank the owners representing Kingwood who are here today. They have been tremendous to work with. Township, I know I personally have been working with them since day one of working at the county for 4 years. But township staff much longer than that. I would just thank them for their dedication to this project and their flexibility when we come back and say this is not acceptable and this needs to change, and just their continued efforts are very much appreciated, so I just would like to mention that. I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have, and the owners are also here to do the same today.
Thank you. Questions from council for the planner on the report? Councillor Mitchell.
Spencer, I think it's page 3 of your report. There's mention that there were 6 studies commissioned and completed for Kingwood in support of this application. Are those studies public documents, or do they belong to Kingwood?
Through the mayor, those supporting studies are part of the application, so we can make those publicly available should anybody request a copy of those. I would also note that those are the initial studies. However, there are draft plan conditions to ensure that the final copy of all of those reports are received to our satisfaction prior to any subdivision being registered.
So follow up, if someone wanted to say one or any of those studies, would they have to go to Kingwood, or are they available through your office?
Through the mayor, they can contact our staff directly.
Okay, that's my question.
Anyone else? Questions for the planner? Deputy Mayor Grigg?
Just to confirm, so when we're talking about the zone change for the OPA, we're looking at the densities. The map that was just up, the sort of, with all the lines on it and the blocks, that is what it is that we're speaking to today, where in terms of some of the mapping that shows the layouts, and that's a potential for what that development with that proposed density would look like, but what we end up seeing could change slightly from that. Is that correct?
Through the mayor to Deputy Mayor Gregg's question, that is correct. So the plate 4 represents the actual draft plan of subdivision, and that is what is being contemplated as that draft plan of subdivision application. Plates 5 and 6 are essentially marketing plans established by Kingwood just to show potential of what these blocks may look like, they may build out as. There is likely to be change within some of those blocks, but the key being the overall densities themselves. They need that relief to achieve higher densities within some of the blocks. So there's a higher density proposed in the apartment blocks than there is in the townhouse blocks, for example.
And as a follow-up, so for the increased densities that are being proposed for each individual medium density block, is an increase or a departure from what the policy framework is. The policy framework sets a maximum and a minimum for that range of density. The recommendations in this report as is, do those address the minimum density? Because while the subdivision plan is showing what the maximum density would look like, and I know that is the intention of the developer and the goal of the township and staff, what do those designations permit in terms of a lowest density that could be put forward by the developer in the future?
Through the mayor to the question, it's an excellent question, and historically what we would do is we would actually look block by block and assess what those densities are based on unit forms and types. And when we're drafting the actual policy, the implementing policy, we would provide a range that caps them at that upper threshold, but provides a lower standard as well. If the product should change and, it achieves a slightly less density, we're not saying that they must be, as dense as possible. In this case, we would say that that is the maximum density possible. If you wanted to be lower than that, that is acceptable.
And this is one additional follow-up, and then I'll give a bit of space. So if in the future a block that's potentially approved to be designated medium density with a maximum as requested by the owner, if they were wanting to do low density instead, that would have to come back and they'd have to apply for a zone change as part of that process. But if they were looking to do a lower density, that's still within the scope of what we'd be approving in this zone change, that would not require a zone change, because there's a range within that. It's only when they would be seeking to do something outside of that range that it would come back and go through a zone change process in the future.
Through the mayor to the question, with respect to the densities, once we establish the densities for the block and for the plan itself, they actually form policy. So if they do look to deviate from that, it's not a zone change. They would have to go through the county for an official plan amendment. So it is a more substantial process. We are aware that plans do change and evolve over time, and we do anticipate that there may be a time in the future where the owners come forward and say, based on market demands, we don't need this block as being medium density anymore. The market is demanding more singles, so we need to down designate that. They would have to follow up with the corresponding applications, and it would also result in a red line amendment to the actual plan of subdivision as well.
Any other questions for the planner on the report? Councillor Mitchell? Councillor Stewart?
A few different things, and they're kind of around the theme of parkland and trails. because this density is clearly different than what we already have in the village, and in a lot of villages in rural Oxford County. So we have these designated green spaces, and I think we need to focus on them when it comes to looking at these more dense developments. So I just want to clarify a couple things when it comes to the trails. We have commitments in the conditions that the developer will provide trails. Can you speak to the phasing of those trails, and does that trail, where they're located, and does it include the ones that run in behind the condos in a couple blocks there? Just sort of speak to that whole network of trails that we should get, and sort of when they'll be developed in tandem with the phasing, or earlier, later, what that looks like.
Through the mayor to Councillor Stewart's question, with respect to the trail, the vast majority of the focus has been on ensuring that we have these lands and the township is able to provide a trail for the residents, not just of this development, for the community as a whole. The timing of it is not, frankly, it's not yet pinned down. We do have a construction phasing plan from the owner based on what they're anticipating to build out as being the product. I imagine what they see as being needed for the market right now. Those are more immediately surrounding the existing townhouses fronting on Middleton and further removed from the eastern boundary of the property. It's not to say that this council and staff and everybody else couldn't suggest to the owner that the trail is of critical importance, and that is something that there's a hope it would be established, or more than a hope, I should say, there's a requirement that it be established earlier in the plan as opposed to later. I know the phasing plan does show approximately the westerly half of the property as constituting phase 1, and the easterly half, which is more surrounding the river, as constituting phase 2. So accordingly, you would anticipate more of the trail development to surround that phase 2 timing. But by all means, if that is something that council has a desire to express or explore further and note for the owner, those are good conversations to have.
So further to that, when we look at a larger development, and this is 100 some odd acres, that's phased in a way that delivers more of the parkland later in the development, I think it's important to look at that. You know, this is not something that's going to happen overnight. This is something that's going to happen over, I'm not even going to guess a certain amount of time, but certainly not in a 5-year period, let's say. So if we're going to stretch it out over that amount of time, we really need to look at ways to provide that space early on, rather than just sort of being the finishing touches of a development.
Deputy Mayor Gregg.
On the topic of trails, in the report, it speaks to additional studies that will need to be completed to establish approvals for the trail that is going to go along the river. So I know that there's a lot of moving pieces and different agencies that have to interact with that portion, and so I'm glad that's captured in here. My question is in relation to establishing the density for Block 37 that backs onto the river. In confirming in approving the density at this stage, if the placement and density of that block impacts the ability for the trail to be established with the appropriate environmental, the study approvals in place, would the Block 37 density then prioritize over the trail, and is there potential that we wouldn't have the trail behind that density behind that block, because the block pushes close to that floodplain? Or is this, as proposed and recommended with all conditions, guaranteeing the establishment of the trail along the river regardless of the result of the study results? And sorry, as I'm saying that, I'm hearing myself. I understand that's very confusing. If the study results come back and say the trail can't go where you're saying it's going to go, but it could go 3 feet this way, have we built 3 feet in too close through this designation today that then would mean no trail? And if so, is there a way to address Block 37 so that it won't be a barrier to implementing a trail?
Through the mayor to Deputy Mayor Greg, it's a great question. And as far as Block 37 is concerned and the development limit itself, we do have a fair amount of confidence as far as where the development limit exists and is shown on that plan. The studies did work to produce that development limit with some confidence. As far as the trail location itself, it's the final EIS slope stability. These studies will actually show the location of the trail and ensure that somewhere within that Block 37 the trail can be accommodated. And further, that's where township staff would work alongside the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority to ensure that it is appropriate as to their satisfaction. We're able to secure the necessary Section 28 permits. It can and does happen that studies get produced, the final studies, and it results in the need to redline, amend the plan. We've had this happen predominantly. There's a subdivision that I'm thinking of immediately that happened with the swim block. So once the phases were being registered, they looked at the swim block and it was not in fact sized to accommodate all of the growth. So they had to redline the plan, include alert. Actually what happened in that case is they lost some of the existing lots for whether they're singles or towns or what have you, to accommodate that need for a larger swim facility. So the same thing could happen with any aspect of this plan.
So in the way that some lots were lost to accommodate the swim pond, if necessary, would some lots be lost to accommodate the trail? Does the trail have the same function and value in the measurements of the development as say, like I understand a swim pond is vital, where a trail is a nice thing for the community. Are we at risk of losing the trail at the cost of lots, or does the process allow for the prioritization or the commitment from the owner to establishing the trail to work within the results of the studies that are still to come forward?
Through the mayor, it's well understood that the trail is not a nice to have. The trail, we view the trail as non-negotiable. The trail is something that's critical to this plan, to this development, to the community as a whole. It has been from the very first meeting to discuss these lands and the purchase and sale, etc. The precise location of the trail, the dimensions of the trail, the material used to pave or chips and dust or however you proceed with those fine details of the trail have not been sorted. But we do have a condition on the draft plan that speaks to a trail as being provided. We know that is of the utmost importance to I imagine council. I know the community for certain. So we do have that draft plan condition to ensure that the trail is non-negotiable and that we do get a trail. The exact location of that trail we are not yet aware of.
Any other questions for the planner on the report? Councillor Finch.
The decreased lot area or the increased lot coverage of 48%, what is our zoning bylaw average now?
Through the mayor, for site-specific zoning amendments, so the bylaw typically will speak to between 30 and 40% for coverage based on various residential lot types. Through similar applications through other subdivisions, it has not been uncommon for us to go to upper thresholds of 40, the high end of 40s, for lot coverage. But the most important thing we look at is that cumulative impact piece. So if this entire site is, providing a 48% coverage, what does that result in for a predominantly stormwater management and drainage standpoint? So we do want to make sure that that is accommodated and we have the appropriate infrastructure to accommodate that overall coverage, which in this case we are satisfied that we do have that. But again, if final reports for stormwater management or final engineering comments come in on behalf of the township from the review engineer that warrant some change, then that change will be addressed prior to anything being registered.
Questions for the planner on the report? I have a couple and then I'll ask again. So the application requests permission to go to 6 stories as opposed to our current zoning bylaw, which permits 3. And this council and certainly I have been, a strong supporter of being willing to go higher and with the goal of achieving higher density. But in particular, I'm concerned that when we do that, that means a bunch of people who are not going to have either a backyard or a front yard. Are staff satisfied that the plan in front of us and the conditions that are recommended will facilitate enough parkland, enough green space, enough trail space in general, that the residents that in a Zorra context will be living in a way that they never lived in before, even though a 6-story building is not necessarily that unique in Ontario, but for Zorra it is, that those conditions will allow staff to guarantee that we're going to get the parkland and specifically the trail land that we're looking to get, that staff think are needed.
Through the mayor, with respect to green space and dedicated park space, I'm not sure there's ever enough, to be honest with you. I think the more the better. We are bound by statutory requirements under the Planning Act, which the provincial government has made changes to recently, that really dictate what is required for parkland dedication when developing a subdivision. So we are bound by that. I would highlight that the owners are fully aware of that, and they have gone above and beyond to also incorporate other elements of this plan, such as a portion of Block 26 near the school block, for the exclusive purpose of multi-use courts for the township. So as far as the trail itself is concerned, staff did walk where we envision this future trail to be situated. And it is an exciting prospect, and we do think there is sufficient room there to make something that is really user-friendly and something that the community will benefit from. I think the other thing we've realized is that as a township, there's a desire to take a broader look at all things recreation too. We've had a lot of input through this plan and others in dealing with the rec department and just saying, what future linkages do we have? What opportunities do we have to connect this trail system to other trail systems, to the existing Wildcat Trail? Do we have an opportunity to go further to the west and loop up north towards what we refer to as the Wilson lands? So we are looking at all of these things and seeing how we can incorporate this plan when it comes to fruition into the larger plans for the village of Temsford. Is it enough parkland? I mean, statutorily speaking, it is enough parkland. Would we like to see more? Perhaps. We would note that the block, there was some concern at one point in time that the block adjacent to the swim facility, sometimes those are kind of less desirable lands. We are satisfied they are essentially table lands, so they are kind of high and dry, if you will. They're not swampy or marshy lands, so we do think they will be usable. They can accommodate future playground equipment or whatever the Recreation Department and Council has envisioned for those lands in the future.
Not seeing any others, so I'll go to my second one. So my second one then is more specifically then, are staff satisfied that the conditions recommended give staff the ability to get that parkland? Because emphasizing that this is a draft plan at this point and will be further developed, are staff satisfied that the conditions give staff the ability to get the parkland that they think is required?
Staff are satisfied with the conditions. As far as the ability to lean on that condition to say that the trail must be provided to the satisfaction of the township. And other conditions, likewise, if it says to the satisfaction of the county and it relates to traffic and it ties into the county's master transportation plan and they see something that doesn't jive between the two plans, they are not signing off. Township and the county are not signing off until they are satisfied with what is provided and proposed and is going to happen. So to that end, I think our wording is sufficient to capture that as far as the trail and the parks. We will take another look prior to this advancing to County Council to absolutely ensure that the township is getting what the township needs for the trail and otherwise prior to this receiving any type of consideration at County Council.
Councillor Finch.
Again, saying with this being a draft plan, this might be an early question, but can you speak to the required parking of 1.5 to 1.5 being inclusive of visitor parking? I'm just concerned with the apartments and parking in that area. Is that too early of a question?
Through the mayor to the question, I mean, parking is something that we have considered since day one of this plan. We did We did understand that with higher densities come reductions to parking inevitably, or reduced frontages, or there's only so many things we can deviate from as far as provisions in our bylaw to accommodate these higher densities and introduce some type of affordability, or the hope of affordability, depending how the market dictates that. We are satisfied with the parking for the apartment blocks. We did look at similar projects that the proponent of these specific apartment blocks has done in other communities. It is reasonable as far as the amount of parking. I did try and highlight in the report that many of the blocks in this plan will also be subject to site plan approval. So yes, this draft plan and this OPA and this zone change are the foundation of what will happen here. But there is still a number of details, whether they're coming as draft plan conditions and being finalized, or if they're coming through the site plan control requirements, where we will be looking at things like snow storage areas, lighting, signage, where are they keeping their garbage, if there's tree planting, if there's buffering, if there's landscaping, if there's fencing, drainage matters. All of those details will be addressed through site plan control, and site plan control applies to a large amount of this property. I would indicate that even for townhouse blocks, anything exceeding 10 units in a block, so the back-to-back townhouses, for example, if there's 12 units in a block, those would be subject to site plan control. So staff will be very much involved in this plan for, I anticipate, many, many years to come.
On that same note, is there, again, maybe this is too early of a question, but is there an affordable housing component to this building, apartment building, or too early?
Through the mayor, I think it's a great question. I don't have an answer for that. If there is an affordability component built in, certainly the owners and the agent are aware of opportunities for partnerships with Oxford County if there's an interest in affordable housing initiatives. There's also some benefit to exploring affordability options from a development charges standpoint and otherwise, so we do leave that at the discretion of the proponent, and we are here for those discussions should they wish to engage us in them.
Councillor Stewart.
Just on site plan control, you were rhyming off a number of conditions that you assess with an application. I wondered, and you mentioned earlier we don't have a high density zoning per se in the county as it currently sits, so amenity spaces within the building, is that something as well that would be reviewed with these 6-story applications?
Through the mayor to Councillor Stewart's question, it's a really good question. When we look at, from a preliminary standpoint, when we did look at these apartment buildings, we did look to see, it may seem a small deal, are there balconies provided on these units, for example? Because if there's a reduction to amenity space, there's no playground, for example, is there at least a balcony so that somebody can be outside? Elements such as the building itself, does it have a room on the main floor that somebody can book out for events or some sort of a gathering? So we are looking at things like that. Part of the rationale for locating the apartment blocks where they are located is that they do have better access to a future trail network. They are immediately fronting the village core that exists today. So is there a reduction in amenity space? Yes, there is, but we will be assessing those things too prior to registration and actual site plan control being approved.
Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Gregg and then Councillor.
So when we're on the topic of parking, so with the apartment block, the requested reduction to exclude visitor parking, but to accommodate what we require, which is the 1.5 parking spaces per unit. There is no parking reduction through the remainder of the application, as the draft plan would accommodate what is required in terms of parking in our policies. Having said that, the reduced frontage then ultimately does have an impact on the available parking, because if your driveway is shorter, there is the potential that you're going to have less vehicles in there. Is there any consideration for or potential design opportunities to accommodate additional parking? And I don't mean a parking lot, that does not sound like good land use, but in these types of higher density developments that have less parking per individual unit, sometimes I see where there are some stretches that can be leveraged for some visitor parking. Is there any potential through the design process that if the cumulative impact on parking or frontage reductions would have an impact, you know, if someone's having a birthday party and relatives are coming from out of town, where are those vehicles going? Within the design that wouldn't take away from the volume of residential units?
Through the mayor to the question, I think it's a really good question, and I do know that early on in the process when we were looking at contemplating more street fronting towns, for example, such as the 117 units which currently exist along Middleton, we know that that is not the ideal situation. There are issues with parking and enforcement matters, and we didn't want to replicate that in the balance of the development. So we did bring that forward to the owners. Kingwood did respond by looking at lot depths primarily and saying, listen, many of these blocks will have unit forms that can actually accommodate where Middleton does not accommodate tandem parking. So you can have two vehicles, although they're stacked, you can actually accommodate two vehicles outside of a garage in many of these blocks too. So, and to answer your question about looking at and assessing these things kind of block by block as construction phasing happens, certainly if we're realizing an issue and we have a site plan in front of us that they're seeking approval on, we say, listen, we've realized that there is continuing to be a parking issue or an issue, even if it relates to something else, stormwater management, drainage, or otherwise, we'll certainly work to rectify those issues prior to further approvals.
Councillor Stewart?
Yeah, there's a report later on in the agenda, 12C, regarding growth forecasts, and part of that speaks to county work that's upcoming on policy approaches, I'm just reading it here, to further support increased density. So this application, timing-wise, as opposed to the time that we anticipate to receive more comments or ideas from the county level, how can that, if there's, you know, an approval today to move ahead with this, with what's in front of us, how then can those future policies that become recommendations be attributed to this subdivision?
Through the mayor to Councillor Stewart's question, yes, there is a comprehensive review and a lot of work being done at the county level right now to look at growth projections, future needs, land supply throughout not just Thamesford and Zorra, but the county as a whole. As far as the timing, yeah, I mean, this development is being presented today, obviously in advance of that study being finalized. I do think that there's an opportunity to take a look at what is being proposed here and pending the outcome of this, and actually incorporate that as part of those findings and those needs. But again, I do think Zorra, more than any of the other 8 municipalities, and the 5 rural municipalities in particular, has a unique opportunity where we can accommodate this level of growth, whereas the other rural municipalities oftentimes cannot due to servicing constraints, water, wastewater capacity. So Zorra will experience some growth, perhaps more growth than other areas, but those numbers, Councillor Stewart is absolutely correct. We don't have that report finalized, or that study finalized in advance of considering the application before you today.
Any other questions? One more from me on the trail. Are staff satisfied that with the conditions that are recommended, that staff have the ability to prioritize the development of the trail in this application? I think there's a lot of things in this application that the community wants, whether you define the community as Thamesford or Zorra as an entire township, in terms of the school, in terms of potential food store and other services. But one of the ones that to me has the potential to be delivered very early on as a benefit to the community is that trail. So are there, I'm not asking can the trail be done first, I'm asking are the conditions recommended give staff the ability to work with the developer to prioritize the development of the trail to get it as soon as possible for the community?
To the question, I think if there's a desire of council to make it abundantly clear that the trail is a priority and that's to be done within, earlier in the plan than other phases perhaps, there could be some language assigned to that in a potential resolution that indicates that. So if Township Council were supportive of the application, I see no issue with also including language that speaks to, and that the trail within Block 37 be established as part of Phase 1 of the servicing plan, or whatever verbiage council wishes to incorporate. I think there is an ability to do that.
Any other questions for the planner on the report? Not seeing any. Thank you. Is the applicant here? Is the owner here? And do they wish to speak their application? Do you want to speak to your application?
Morning, Mr. Mayor and council and staff. Thank you very much for listening to our proposal and our draft plan. We're excited to be in Thamesford. We've had this property for over 6 years, and it's been a work in progress. So, and it's evolved as we've been going through different aspects of community concerns and development concerns, and we hear you on the trail, and I think we can work with staff to facilitate a cooperative effort to working through and building that trail sooner than later. Yes. Based on where it's located, and providing that we can work with staff in getting the appropriate approvals from Upper Thames Conservation. I don't think it's a big ask to try and rough that trail in sooner than later.
And that's definitely a selling point for us.
Absolutely.
When we're selling the individual units, to say there is a trail. It's not something, take my word for it, it'll be here. But if it's actually there, that's a big selling point. And so I would certainly see this at the early part of our build-out.
As is the school as well. It's definitely a huge feature for us. I mean, financially, we'd make more money putting houses there, but speed versus greed will sell out a lot quicker if we have a school on the site.
Questions for the owner from council? Councillor Finch.
I spoke to affordable housing, and I'd like to also speak to senior housing. Is that anything that's in your thoughts for your apartments?
I think we don't want to
Too
call
early.
it affordable housing, but I think we have attainable housing, because the density, should you allow this plan to give us the densities that we're requesting, I think the ability of getting the units in that density gives us some accessibility or attainability component, where the land cost of that unit is a little bit less, and the building costs, when you're, we're going to go at this, we're going to try and build out quickly, and we've, in concert with our sales and marketing people, we think that we can push out those back-to-backs quite quickly, and our costs will come down. So we think that we can offer a price point that hasn't been seen in Ontario for quite some time, and it gives everybody in the surrounding community, and it brings you people. I mean, demographics are an issue throughout Canada, and particularly in Ontario. We have an aging population to speak to the senior housing, and we need young people coming in, and everybody, that young person's dream is to have a roof over their heads, something that they can make payments on, that they're, I look at it now, my daughter's just bought a house, and I thought, holy smokes, they got a $600,000 mortgage, how are they gonna manage? They're gonna be paying for that house for 30 years. Well, if you can give them a house that's, you know, 2/3 of that cost, then it's not such a big mortgage and it's not so daunting. It's not a big elephant to bite into. So that's where we are with, we never really considered the government programs on affordability, but I'm not sure whether Alan Drulo, our partner that's developing the 6-story buildings, is contemplating that at all. But you can kind of address that at the site plan approval stage for those buildings.
Any other questions? Deputy Mayor?
And maybe just to add onto that question, separate from the affordability piece, but the retirement piece, in considerations, because there are, I think, 7 separate structures being proposed here. We have a community where we have a lot of overhoused seniors who don't have desirable locations to go to, and then as they are less able to manage their properties and are needing more supports, they're leaving the community. So in consideration of retirement, living in those units, there's a trickle-down effect that has, you know, freeing up other units within the community as well. So to the question of could there be some retirement consideration, I just wanted to put a bit of emphasis on carrying that conversation forward with your partners on the development.
Any other questions for the owners? Couple for me. I think they're pretty easy ones. First one would be, as the owners, would you be supportive of facilitating conversations with Oxford County Housing and your development partner Drulo about the possibility of an affordable component in the apartment buildings?
Sure, I would think so.
I don't see an issue with that.
I don't think that's an issue.
As we are partners with Alan Drulo, I think I'd want his input on it, but you know, from Kingwood's perspective, we'll certainly speak to that.
And my second one is, I asked a question of the planner earlier about the war staff content that the recommended conditions around would facilitate prioritization of the development of the trail. If council was to move something like that in addition to the conditions to something like to prioritize development of the trail, would you, as the owners of the property, have any objection to that?
Zero objection.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for the owners from council?
Probably going to prioritize it, even if you don't, sir.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. Okay. Are there any members of the public, either here in person or virtually, who wish to speak to the application? Not seeing any. Then a motion to come out of the public meeting. Councillor Stewart.
Moved by Stewart, seconded by Grigg, that pursuant to the Planning Act, the public meeting be adjourned at 10:22 a.m. and the regular meeting of council be called back to order.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And do we have a motion to deal with this application? Deputy Mayor Grigg.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that the Council of the Township of Zorra approve in principle the zone change application file number ZN 52214 submitted by Kingwood Riverside Developments Limited, whereby the lands described, part park lots 6-8, concession 1, North Dorchester, part lot 18, and part of St. Patrick Street, and part lots 22 and 23, registered plan number 45, and municipally known as 12 Middleton Street, and 131 and 149 Brock Street in the village of Tempsford, Zorra Township, from General Industrial Zone, MG, Special Restricted Industrial Zone, MR-2 and MR-3, Development Zone, D, and Special Residential Type 1 Zone, R1 Special. 2, Special Residential Type 1 Zone, R1-SP, Special residential type 3 zone, R3 SP. I don't have to say those in the brackets, do I? No. Central commercial zone, institutional zone, open space zone, and development zone to facilitate the proposed draft plan of subdivision. And further, that the Council of the Township of Zorra advise County Council that the Township supports the application for official plan amendment, file number OP 22225, submitted by Kingwood Riverside Developments Limited for the lands described Park Lot 6-8, Concession 1, North Dorchester, Part Lot 18 and part of St. Patrick's Street, and Part Lots 22 and 23, registered plan number 45, and municipally known as 12 Middleton Street, and 131 and 149 Brock Street, to redesignate the subject lands from industrial low-density residential, medium-density residential, and open space to revised low-density residential, medium-density residential, village core, and open space designations. And further, that the Council of the Township of Zorra advise County Council that the Township supports the draft plan of subdivision, file number SB 22-10-5, submitted by Kingwood Riverside Developments Limited for the lands described as Park Lot 6-8, Concession 1, North Dorchester, Part Lot 18 and part of St. Patrick's Street, and Part Lots 22 and 23, registered plan number 5, and municipally known as 12 Middleton Street, and 131 and 149 Brock Street, in the village of Tempsford, Township of Zorra, consisting of 18 lots for single detached dwellings, 11 blocks for townhome dwelling units, 2 blocks for apartment dwelling units, 3 open space blocks, 1 park block, and blocks for turning circles, site triangles, and 0.3 meter reserves served by extensions of George Street and St. Patrick Street, and 4 new local streets subject to the conditions generally outlined in report CP 2025-06, and that council identifies the following concern to be addressed by the developer: that the trail along the river be established early in the development phasing.
Deputy Mayor Gregg, as the mover, would you like to speak to that?
Strategically, that was great, because now I've had enough talking. So in looking at this application, the densities concern me because it's difficult to visualize the end result. And by the end result, I don't mean the bricks and the asphalt and the curbs and the servicing, but the community, the people biking, walking, meeting up, celebrating, volunteering, or not. So I struggled to understand the recommendations for approval in relation to the increased densities because they were on paper a significant deviation from the high end of our current policy framework in terms of densities. I do understand that in this step of the process, we're designating the blocks and the maximum densities, and that the final design specifics can be different. In society, we build houses, we separately deliver education, we separately provide recreation facilities, services, and parks, we separately consider public health, and we work to achieve those initiatives, and we separately police. But that's not how communities function, and when we can apply the priorities and understandings from other jurisdictions, we can better achieve a positive end result for the function and health and vibrancy of the community as a whole. So in the conversations that I've had with staff, I've had some clarity and understanding that a lot of work prior to Thursday at 5 p.m. when I had access to this report had been done to help try to identify and achieve what is going to be a development that works for everybody and is compliant with the priorities of our provincial government, which is essentially who's overseeing the framework of what we're going to be doing here. So in the next steps of this process, where the designations of the land use and the maximum densities have been approved, my hope and expectation is that the owners, with the support of our staff, will continue to work to achieve not only the volume and style of housing that we know to be important and needed, but also configure it in a way that allows for that end community to be as healthy, supportive, functional, and possible in a way that fosters volunteerism and not neighborly conflict. When we talk about what we want for development as a community, I hear a lot of people talk about big lots, sprawling bungalows, and the good old days. In the role of sitting in this chair, I have learned that outside of what we think we like the look of, or we think we like the function of, that there's a lot more things to consider. We're in the midst of an affordability and absolute atrocious housing crisis. And so when we're looking at how we are making use of those lands, and that's the important policy framework here, when we're looking at how we use those lands, it's really important to make good use of those lands. That is the tool we have to protect our farmland from sprawl. That is the tool we have to drive the smaller value of land that's tacked onto the construction cost is what's going to bring those price points down, which is what you spoke to earlier. But also making use of the water and wastewater servicing that's on site, that provides a cost saving so that those types of investments don't have to be made again in near future for the next round of housing, wherever that may be. I also think, I know as part of the development, the development will put in the roads and the sidewalks, and that's really great up front. The long-term financial responsibility for those then is the municipalities. And so when we're looking at road networks and sidewalk networks, I'm also now learning that the ability for us to fund those eventual repairs and replacements are more financially responsible by working within the higher density developments that we're considering here today. So I'm now understanding that while I still have concerns around the ability for people to park and attend a birthday party, and that some of the reductions we've seen have created parking challenges, that the owner and staff will continue through that lens of thinking about the function and health of the end result as we define sort of those individual details. This development will bring a lot of good things. It's the best chance for the lowest price for homes. It's rentals, which are critical, and we now have homes that are not designed to be rentals, that are functioning as rentals because it's a critical need. And I'm really optimistic about what that's going to mean when the appropriate housing is actually provided for those who need it most. It's going to bring some additional goods and services, if it's specifically what it is that's on the draft or otherwise, with these lands protected in the central commercial zone to not flip to residential. I know that there will be something available for this community that can add to the health of the community. And from my, I've always been driven in the seat to work for my community. And when I think about community, this development can support volunteerism that will help keep our community the vibrant place that it is. And as for around the county, we're setting new records, and they surely will be watching. So I'd really like for this development to be developed in a way that demonstrates how density can be done and how this development can serve to debunk some of the concerns communities and councils have about the impacts of density. Because a housing crisis isn't solved in 110 acres, it needs to be bigger. And so the success we're able to accomplish here not only can help support the future of Chelmsford and Zorra, but also be a model that can help our neighbors chip in and do their part as well, so that the goals that we're trying to achieve can be realized on a much broader scale across the province. Sorry, one final thing. And so having said that, I anticipate supporting this application before us today.
Councillor Stewart is the seconder.
Not a lot to add to that. I think Councillor Grigg touched on virtually every aspect of this, so I thank her for that summary. I think after conversation with staff and hearing questions and answers here today, I think this is a big change for Chelmsford and Zorra. I think, the last point that Councillor Grigg said was most important, that we've we've done a lot of homework to get to where we are, but I think it's just as important to watch it as it happens to make sure that this is a model that works as a solution for increased density in the entire county as well.
Any other discussion? Councillor Mitchell.
It seems this report has been a long time coming. We've been working as long as we've been on council, and it goes back to your first term of council. But when I read the report, I can see why it took so long. It is, compared to our normal planning issues, this is hugely more complex. A lot more I's to dot and a lot more T's to cross. I want to acknowledge the work of the applicants, of Zorra, Oxford, and Upper Temp staff, and especially the work of Spencer of putting this all together. When I ended up with very few questions, which is unusual for me, but as I went through it, and a question would come to mind, I'd keep on reading, and the information was there, so at the end I didn't have a big long list. I too support the recommendation to approve the zone changes with the 53 conditions attached. Fortunately, you didn't have to read all 53. The motion was long enough as it was. Recognizing that there's much more information to come over the next 10 to 20 years as this project unfolds and we get to work on the ground through site plans and negotiations with various parties that will become involved in this over the term of it. There were some very strong points in the proposal that I'd like to highlight. And number one was the emphasis on medium density and rental housing. And to me, that means that this proposal is market-driven rather than mandated by government. And I think projects have a much better chance of success if they are market-driven. When we put this property on the market, the 100+ acres, the stipulation was that we didn't want 100 mansions on 1 acre lots. We wanted housing that was attainable, and that's the word that the applicant used, that was going to fill a gap in the available housing in Zorra Township. So the density level exceeded what I expected. It certainly was different than what the original plans were that when we had the open houses, 4 or 5 years ago now. But the housing market and the economy have changed dramatically since those initial proposals were put out there. And so I applaud you for addressing the changes rather than having a $600,000 mortgage, maybe a $400,000 mortgage, which to me sounds like a lot of money, but maybe that's more attainable for a lot of people. So whether these units that are proposed to be built are seen as starter homes, downsizing homes, or long-term homes as purchased or as rentals, I think they are an important addition to our community and fulfills the goals that council, before the previous council, set out a number of years ago. I'm very pleased to see Drulo involved in the apartment part of it. I was concerned that the apartments would be something that were way off in the future, but I know that Drulo has a good reputation as a builder and an operator of apartment complexes of the size that we're looking at, and so I think it's great that they're involved in this project. I'm also, as the mayor alluded to, pleased that we're looking at going to 6 stories, and I noted in the report that the 6-story apartment buildings won't be any higher than the silos were that got tore down. They'll have people in them instead of grain in them, so I think that's a bonus. And I also noted that there was no recommendation that we would have to buy an aerial truck for our fire department. I know when we first talked about 6-story apartment buildings, there was some talk that, well, we have to have an aerial if we're going to have buildings that high, but these buildings have all kinds of fire suppression systems in them, including sprinkler systems and that. City of London doesn't have aerials that are reach 30 stories high. So And in addition, as was mentioned in the report, we have an agreement with Ingersoll. They can have their aerial here in 10 minutes. So I was glad that that wasn't going to be an extra cost to the township. And as far as the commercial blocks and the institutional blocks, there will be some employment added through those buildings and those. But Thamesford is, especially since the closing of Maple Leaf Foods, a bedroom community for London, Ingersoll, and Woodstock, and will continue to be so based on its two things: based on its location and because it's a great place to live. And while these commercial and institutional will bring some add employment, the main thing is that they will add services and improve the lifestyles of the people that move into these buildings. So I think I'm glad to hear that the rest of council is in support of the motion as it is. It's the first big step. There's a ton of steps to go forward afterwards, but Spencer alluded to it this morning that, and Don McLeod talked about it many times about how easy Kingwood is to work with, and I think that any issues that come up, and my colleagues asked a number of great questions this morning about parking and trails and those sort of things. I think that the relationship that our staff and this councils have built with Kingwood, and I assume with Drulo as well, we'll be able to overcome all those obstacles and make this a great addition to the township and to Ontario. So I'm fully in support of this motion.
Anyone else? Councillor Finch.
I understand we've spoke around this horseshoe many times about density and going up instead of going out, proper use of farmland with village boundaries, so we are not taking prime agriculture land out of production. The draft plan, when I first looked at it, shocked me with how dense it actually was, but also happy to see a proposed space for a food market, medical building, restaurant, commercial space. As this village grows, we need these proposed development pieces to become a complete community. I'm happy to support the motion.
Anyone else? I want to emphasize, not so much for council and staff, I think you know, but for the public, that what's in front of council today, what council is considering is a draft plan of subdivision, not a final plan of subdivision. What council is considering is approval in principle of a zone change and supporting an official plan amendment, supporting a plan of subdivision with 53 conditions to further refine and finalize those plans before building permits are taken out for individual structures. If council proceeds with approving this, it will be a radical change for Thamesford. It'll be a radical change for Zorra. It'll be a radical change for Oxford County. It will take decades for that to be fully built out. I think by the time the final piece of sod is turned over and planted and the sprinklers turned on for the last little bit of grass in front of the last little piece of building, hopefully the trail will be sooner than that last bit of grass. But I think that if we proceed with this, it will be the largest residential development in terms of acres, in terms of units, in terms of number of people, in terms of density in the history of the township of Zorra, and I think with respect to residential development, with respect to Oxford County as well. And I think if we think about the goals that this council has set, as Councillor Mitchell said, at least 3 councils in a row, this is what it takes to get that done. If we actually want to provide a quantity of housing that reduces upward pressure on purchase prices and on rentals, if we want to provide a variety of housing forms that tries to drive attainability as well, if we want to provide housing in density that reduces sprawl, this is how it's done. The number of times I've seen municipalities around the province start to get concerned about sprawl when they're considering a boundary adjustment, and it's too late. This is how you prevent sprawl, is by infilling, brownfield redevelopment, densifying within your areas. By the time you're talking about a boundary adjustment, the boundary adjustment's inevitable. The housing justification is going to be there, especially in the 2025 context, as the planner made clear. So this is how that has to happen. I cannot support this enough in the context of all the initiatives, the strategic initiatives that this council has said that it wants to achieve. It ticks all those boxes. I think also some of the concerns that residents have and that this council shares about, the number of people this is going to bring to the community, the density, the increased traffic, are legitimate concerns. Our staff are working on those, and there's 53 conditions here that if we pass this, will give staff direction from council to say, yes, now deliver on those 53 conditions, work with the developer and deliver on those. But I think we shouldn't forget that there are benefits that will come as this development happens. As long as I have been on this council, in fact, before I was on council when the grocery store in Chelmsford closed, that has been a constant issue for this community. And the answer has always been, for me, you can't, municipalities don't build grocery stores. I'm certainly not interested in building a grocery store, certainly not interested in operating a grocery store. What tools do municipalities have to deliver a grocery store? Your community has to grow to a certain level where a business says, at that population level, I can make a business model work and deliver a grocery store. This is the only tool that a municipality has to make that happen. In terms of doctor spaces, other health services that might be delivered in this commercial development, and other retail opportunities, employment lands, this is how that happens. I think we have to, remind residents that with every piece of change that we consider, whether that's to oppose change or not, because opposing change is a change as well, there are pros and cons. But I think this change helps us realize for our community in the long term many, many, many more long-standing concerns and pros than it does cons. I'm fully satisfied that the application in front of us and the 53 conditions gives our staff directions to maximize those pros, minimize those cons, and move forward to the next step where we're not, supporting in principle, and it's not draft, and it's not supporting, it's finalizing these things and getting these things built. So very supportive of this application. Anyone else wish to speak to it before I call the question? I'm not going to offer to read it again before I call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And I'm going to suggest that we take a 10-minute break. 11:02, I'll call the meeting back to order. Next up is item 7, delegations, of which there are none, and 8, reports from Public Services Department, 8.1, Roads Division. Director Oliver, is there anything you'd like to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
Nothing to highlight, no.
Questions from council on the report? Councillor Finch.
On the 47th line, is that a share replacement in cost for putting up those signs and stuff?
Yes, all costs associated to the name changing have been shared with EZT. Yes.
Any other questions? Have a mover? Okay. Deputy Mayor Gregg.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that report 2025-005 from the Director of Public Services be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 8.2, Recreation and Facilities Division, Manager Caldwell, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
Good morning, everyone. Nothing to highlight.
Questions from council on the report? Councillor Finch.
Kind of a question, kind of a comment. It was exciting to see the post that you put up on Facebook and all the feedback from the residents on what option they wanted for Memorial Park. You do have in there no border edge for the final design. Can you just speak to what you're hoping to have there versus the bordered edge that's there now?
Yes, absolutely. That there was never an intention to have a border edge in the design. It was just kind of absorbed from the aerial shot of the current playground that we have. So much like our newest playground at North Park, there'll just be a seamless edge from the grass to the engineered wood fiber.
Any other questions on the report? Do I have a mover? Deputy Mayor Gregg.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that report 2025-004 from the Manager of Recreation and Facilities be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? The one comment I have is I absolutely love the data and analysis that's in here further down after the visuals of the park. I really think that as we populate that over time as well, I think that's really going to help inform decisions for council later as to what services, what recreation services are our residents actually participating in, and then cross-referencing that to costs. And I think it will really help us make decisions down the road as that keeps going. So really happy to see that level of data being collected. Anybody else? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9, reports from Corporate and Protective Services Department. 9.1, Emergency Services, 2025-007 from the Fire Chief and Manager of Emergency Services. Chief, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
Not at this time.
Questions from council on the report? Do I have a mover? Deputy Mayor Gregg.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Stewart, that report 2025-007 from the Fire Chief and Manager of Emergency Services be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? Councillor Mitchell.
A few comments on the report as to the study on possible adjustment of response borders. I'm glad to see this come forward. This is something I've been a project of mine for 12 years or more, going back to my days as a district chief, and it was I asked to have this included in not only this strategic plan, but the strategic plan for the previous council. So I'm glad to see that this has been wrapped up. I had four main areas within the township and surrounding area that were of concern to me that I wanted to have looked at specifically. One being the Happy Hills Campground and Residences, which is actually population-wise the third largest community in Zorra Township for much of the year. It is served by the Embro Station, but is actually closer to the Uniondale Station. The second was Kintor, which used to be halfway between the Thamesford and Uniondale stations until the new Thamesford Station was built, which made it a little bit further away. And the third one was the Maplewood area, which is a kind of no man's land when it comes to fire coverage for Zorra Township. And the other is the Welborn area, which is served by the Thorndale Station in Thames Center, but is actually much closer to the Uniondale Station. And I'll point out that since I retired 7 years ago tomorrow, there have been some changes in response protocols in that, especially at the Uniondale Station, they now all go respond to the hall rather than going some to get the trucks and the rest of the firefighters going directly to the scene. And that's only made possible because of new technology with the apps that they have on their phones, which just allows the incident commander to know how many firefighters are responding and how long the truck should wait before they leave the hall. We've also, since I retired, had much better coordination with area municipalities, and especially in the north end with St. Mary's, with joint training and joint responses. And so those things have changed since I initiated this, but I think the chief did a good job of doing a thorough analysis of potential changes to the initial response. He gave a good explanation of why there are some technical reasons that when you start going across municipal boundaries, it's difficult to, just because that fire hall happens to be closer than another fire hall, the response time is not going to be better just by changing some things around. So I think the key paragraph to me in the report was that the district chiefs and deputy district chiefs have the authority to request resources through dispatch. So even though we may not be changing the initial response, I think we're still working towards having the best response to not only the residents of Zorra Township, but our nearby neighbors. So I want to thank the chief for finally checking this off my bucket list of things I wanted to get done in my lifetime. Thank you.
Any other discussion? This is an excellent report. I really suggest that if residents read this report, they would all sleep a little bit better. It doesn't really suggest any changes, but it basically makes it very clear that changes in this context would probably be a net negative because they are well looked after today. So excellent report, thank you. Any other discussion? All's in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 9.2, Building Drainage and Bylaw Services. Report 2025-003 from the Bylaw Enforcement Officer regarding a year-end update. Is there anything you would like to highlight for council in that report before I ask them for questions?
No, sir, there's not.
Questions from council on the report? Do I have a mover? Councilor Mitchell.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Finch, that report 2025-003 from the Bylaw Enforcement Officer be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you. And 9.2B, report 2024-128 from the Chief Building Official Drainage Superintendent. Is there anything you'd like to highlight for council there before I ask them for questions?
No.
Questions from council? Not seeing any. Do I have a mover? Oh, sorry. Councillor Finch has a question.
Can you just let us know how your January 9th meeting went?
Which, not January 9th? Oh, you mean the drain? Yeah. Oh, good. So, and you got a little picture of the drain, right? Of what's going on. They're really just tipping that drain the other way because it feeds Lafarge Quarry, and they don't want the water dumping in there, so they're going to run it the other way. There's only really 4 people involved in that drain: Lafarge, Federal, ourselves, and Enbridge Gas. So it was good. Will we get it built this year? Maybe in the fall, possibly.
Any other questions? Councillor Mitchell.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Finch, that report 2025-163 from the Chief Building Official Drainage Superintendent be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.3A, Financial Services Report 2025-001 from the Manager of Financial Services / Treasurer regarding excluded expenses in the 2025 budget. And Manager Grogan, is there anything you'd like to highlight for council before I ask them for questions?
Nothing to highlight, thank you.
Questions from council on the report? Do I have a mover? Councilor Mitchell.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Finch, whereas council acknowledges that expenses related to amortization are excluded in the 2025 budget, and further that expenses related to landfill closure and post-closure are excluded from the 2025 budget as this function is not within the township's jurisdiction, and that expenses related to post-employment benefit expenses are not applicable to the township. Now therefore be it resolved that the Council of the Township of Zorra accept the excluded expenses of the 2025 budget as per Ontario Regulation 284-09, and resolve that the Council of the Township of Zorra receive Report 2025-001 as information.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 9.4, Legislative Services, Report 2025-002 from the Director of Corporate and Protective Services regarding Wilson Land donation asset naming. And Director Martin, is there anything you would like to highlight for council there?
No, thank you.
Questions from council on the report? Deputy Mayor Gregg.
Just a question around the registry that we typically work off of. So it's cited in the report that within the policy we can do this as well. Could we request that the donor of the lands provide essentially what is the submission piece to add it to the registry, just so that we have that documentation as part of the record moving forward?
Yes, they did submit that, and that will be included in the registry.
Perfect. I was less concerned about it in terms of being a requirement of policy and more just having some documentation around the importance of the name and the relevance. Sure. Thank you so much.
Councilor Mitchell.
And I'd just like to clarify where this piece of land is. And my understanding is this goes back to about 10 months or so ago when there was a proposal by a developer to add a piece into our developed land or a village area, and council agreed that because there was a drain going through the adjoining area, that it made sense to add that to our land development. And so that was one part. But then on the other side of that drainage ditch, there was some land, and I just want to confirm that the land we're talking about here is that land on the other side that's not going to be developed but has been included?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
So on Road 68, and you're correct, the plate that you cited, plate 5 on that planning report that was brought back in June.
Yeah.
You're correct, that's
the land.
The area of
and how many acres is that involved?
27.
Okay, so it's a significant piece of potential recreation land for us.
Correct.
And it said it's being donated in for a tax receipt. Mm-hmm. Who gives the receipt and how does that work?
Mm-hmm. So that is done at the township level, but I'll let Kim speak to that.
Okay.
Perfect. So the township is required to follow Canada Revenue Agency regulations and requirements when it comes to the issuance of a registered charitable donation. In this instance, because it is a donation of a non-cash item, so it's a donation in kind, the municipality is required to determine the fair market value of the asset that's being donated. In this instance, we have consulted with a third-party appraiser to obtain an appraisal for the value of that land so that we've got support and documentation in our files in regards to the amount of that donation receipt to be issued by the township.
So is that a one-time thing that is it we give them money or do they just not have to pay taxes? Is that?
So essentially, the owner who's made the donation to us will get a official donation receipt to include in preparation of his tax return, which in essence would offset any capital gains
Oh, okay.
that he realized on the property.
Okay, so it doesn't involve any money coming from us?
No, absolutely not.
It's money that he's gonna save from the big bad guys? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I don't think I asked for a motion yet, did I? Do I have a mover? Councilor Mitchell.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Finch. The council approved the recommendation for the naming of the lands received from Robert Wilson as outlined in report 2025-002.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. No correspondence requiring direction, no boards and committees updates. Information items. So we have 12 A, B, C, D, and E. I'm not sure what council wants to do with the 5 of those, if I have one mover or whatever, so we'll start with whoever's got something. Is that Councilor Mitchell?
I don't have the movement, but I would like to have some discussion about item B, the letter on regarding connectivity objectives, so.
Absolutely, if you have any questions, go for it.
Okay. This kind of brought up something that 5-6 years ago was a huge issue with us, was the installation of fiber optics and the whole internet connectivity within the township. It was at the top of our list to the point that we set aside several $100,000 a year for 3 or 4 years towards potential SWIFT projects. And then that evolved into something else, and the province changed the rules, and we took that money and have dedicated it to another purpose. So we haven't talked much about internet accessibility for the last couple of years. I know in the north end, because we were for as long as I've been around, we've had fiber optics for many years now. There's some other areas towards Harrington that have had it for a few years. There's been a corridor come down, and I know Thamesford is now, Quadro is now into Thamesford. And when I drive around the township, I see Weber putting in those orange cables here, there, and everywhere. But I've kind of lost track. Where are we at in the township as far as what's been installed, what's been planned? Are there still people in the township that don't have high-speed internet? So I didn't know which staff member would be on top of this, so I asked Marcus, and he came back to me, sent me a map from the province, and I appreciate that, Marcus, but it was kind of hard to read because there was 4 different colors of what's been installed, what's going to be installed, what the government has paid for, and whatnot. So, and then yesterday Steve sent me some more detailed information, so I'd just like to get some more information, because are we in good shape in Zorra as far as internet availability, or is there still a bunch of work to be done? So I'll just throw that out there.
Thank you, Councilor Mitchell. No, so yeah, to date, through the SWIFT program, everything north of Road 88 was covered over the past few years, and including the Thamesford feed, which brought down 19 Highway, included Thamesford, and then south of Thamesford out 19 Highway towards where the old office was. So that's pretty much all it's covered. There is a large portion of Zorra Township to the southern half of 88 that is not covered and does not have availability to high-speed internet to date. There is been lots of talk starting back in January of 24 with a company called Explore, who is the awarded ISP, which is installation of the fiber provider, who won the bid to do that through a bidding process. And there's been talk since January of last year, discussion about running lines and where the municipality wants the running lines opposed to where they would rather put the running lines. They propose they want the running lines in the road, about a half a meter off edge of pavement on a paved road, or on a gravel road about a half a meter off edge of grass line in the road. We're opposed to that. Our recommendations which are very similar to the MTO recommendations, is a meter off of property line and a meter and a half to 2 meters deep. They are pushing back on that because of the costs associated with that. The reasons why we recommend that is very much in line with all other municipalities in Oxford County, including Oxford County. is because of future costs whenever we do any maintenance work or capital works to our roads. Existing utilities are in the roads now are cause extreme cost to do anything work around them. The chances of damage, repair, loss of service if we do hit them. So that's why there's been ongoing conversations about, you know, why we don't want it there, why they do want it there. The fact of the matter is what any of the ISPs that bid on this project didn't approach any municipalities to ask them where we want the running lines prior to making a bid. So they went and placed a bid assuming they would be able to put a quick and easy area on the road and within the road allowance. And now you can't afford where we want it. So there's been a lot of back and forth. Infrastructure Ontario now got involved. There've been lots of meetings with Infrastructure Ontario since early summer. And we're trying to take a hard stance at you know, the reasons why we want to keep the running line where it is. We're willing to work with them as far as, you know, if it's not possible for obstacles in the ditch such as trees and things, but as a site-by-site basis, we will meet with them, and just like we did with the SWIFT program, and we'll come up with a solution that they still get their product installed in the road, their utility installed in the road, and keep moving in a timely fashion. And we had great success with that type of with the SWIFT program and working with Weber and Quadro, and very few hiccups. This is not starting out well with lots of delay. The deadlines are pushing them, which in turn are pushing municipalities to give in. But I mean, it's just in the future, the cost to taxpayers, well, once they got their infrastructure in the road, we have to deal with all future costs going forward, and we're trying very hard to avoid that.
I certainly support you on your position there, Steve. It makes no sense if Quadro and the other ISPs have put it where we want it, it's going to be out of the way. That's where these people should put it. Is there, do you know if, you mentioned deadline, is there a deadline for them that if they don't get this in the ground, they lose the contract and it goes back out for?
Yes, end of 2025 is the deadline to have that all installed. And as far as, you know, in past with working with, especially through the SWIFT program, their lead times to getting planning and applications and conversations with municipalities started years ahead of this, right? So, you know, like I said earlier, I was only introduced to Explore to start talks was in January of last year, so not even like a year ago approximately, which is really not enough time for projects this size, and the hurdles you got to go through and the permitting that's required, you know, the staff time. So you know, we're flooded with permits coming in all the time, so we're trying to deal with them as quick as possible so there's no holdups, and we've been very successful with that to date. But when they supply, they submit permits not abiding by what our recommendations are for the running lines, and it just slows up the process even more because they're going to be sent back for readjustment and so on and so forth. So it's kind of a stalled process in some of them.
So when we looked at this 5-6 years ago, money was the big issue, that there wasn't enough money to go around to get this all in. Now it's the process, the money's there, it's the process and the unwillingness of this ISP to work with the township that's holding it up. Are the people that need to be serviced yet, are they getting their internet through towers or?
I'm not aware of where they're getting their net, if they're getting any at all.
Okay.
I'm assuming it's similar to just like the north end was. It was either be wireless or whatever.
Yeah.
Just myself, we had wireless before we had fiber.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge need for it. We want to see it happen, but we don't want to be paying for that. You know, the working around the infrastructure for doing any type of works. There was even conversation in one of my meetings with Infrastructure Ontario and Explore that they would say provide an agreement that any associated costs going forward be covered, that if we allow them to put it where they want to put it, and they would do that for only up to 5 years. So that really doesn't help, the township and their future works and the cost for taxpayers.
Okay, well, I appreciate the update. Like I say, at one time this was a huge issue we talked about all the time, and now it's kind of, because we didn't have really anything to do with it. The province had taken over the whole process, so so I appreciate the update and knowing what the situation is, and hopefully it can be resolved.
Yes, it's my pleasure. And, you know, any questions or anything that comes up, you know, between council meetings or anything, please don't hesitate to call me. Working with the SWIFT program prior to this was a dream compared. Like, they were excellent to work with. They understood our stance, and they worked closely with Zorra Township. They had, the complaint aspect to it, of it by taxpayers, the property damage or whatever was dealt with in a timely fashion, was dealt with in a very professional fashion. So it was a very good experience with SWIFT, but we're not experiencing with this program, unfortunately.
And I just want to make it like crystal clear for council staff and residents that the current plan to get high-speed internet to residents is an Ontario government through Ministry of Infrastructure and Infrastructure Ontario plan, not SWIFT, not Township of Zorra, not Oxford County. So, our ability to answer residents' questions on what are you getting, when are you getting it, how's it going to happen, is really, we can be as informed as they can by looking on a website kind of thing. Any other questions on any of 12A, B, C, D, or E? Councilor Mitchell?
The letter from Chelmsford School about thanking us for I believe for the busing, could we please have staff forward that letter to Upper Thames staff? Because it was actually an Upper Thames program that they were attending. So I think their staff would appreciate getting that letter as well.
Anything else? Do I have a mover for any of those? Councillor Finch?
Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that items 12A through E be received and filed for information purposes only.
Is there any discussion? I would just give council an update on 12C, Phase 1 comprehensive review of the area municipal growth forecasts. So there was a fair bit of activity at County Council on that when council considered it. And as is outlined in the report, there will be subsequent delegations and reports from Oxford County Planning to this council to talk about, what is this going to look like in a Zorra context, and recommendations and things for this council to consider. And there's also going to be correspondence from the county coming for a future agenda here on the resolution that Oxford County Council passed in response to the province's growth forecasts it'll be under information items or correspondence or something like that. So there is still more to come on that. That is by no means is that the final stage of that. This is the initial stage of the county's response to the growth forecasts that came from the Ministry of Finance. And I think that's the only other comment I had. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And no unfinished business, no notices of motion. Bylaws, do I have a mover there? Councillor Finch.
Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that bylaws 0125 and 0225 be taken as read a first, second, and third time and finally passed, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign this same and affix the appropriate seal thereto.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 16, items of community interest in the calendar. Councillor Finch.
So Friday, the Beachville Museum is holding a Winter Wonderland PA Day Camp. January 18th, the Embro Legion is doing a trivia night at 7 p.m. January 23rd, the OCFA is having their AGM at the Elmhurst. Doors open at 6 o'clock and tickets can be purchased online. And February 28th, Egg Society is doing a winter social, comedy show, and concert with food and drinks.
Anyone else? Councillor Mitchell.
We usually talk about things that are going to happen, but the agenda says past or upcoming events. So last Wednesday night at Wisdom Wednesday at the Browns Corners, former Councillor Jim Verwer gave a presentation about a man named W.H. Gregory, who was on the first East Nizora Council in the 1850s. And he talked about one of the first decisions that new council made was that they were going to turn what was line 10 at the time is now Road 119 from Thamesford up to the Perth County line. Turn it from a dirt path and put gravel on it. And it turns out, Steve, that some things haven't changed. Roads are the most important thing that happened in Zorra Township, or east of Zorra at the time. There was two problems, though. Every member of council owned property on that road, and the taxes were going up from $8 to $60 a year per property. So there was a mob formed with armed with guns, knives, and pitchforks who went around, and they actually took Councillor Gregory they kidnapped him. And as they continued on, I think they were able to kidnap another member of council. Councillor Gregory escaped, and the other councillors heard what was going on, and they went into hiding before they could get caught. Eventually, things settled down. They got it graveled. Council wasn't happy with the work that was done. They wouldn't pay for it. The contractor took them to court. There was a lawsuit, and they ended up. So it was kind of an interesting story from almost 200 years ago, and I guess it turns out that getting an angry email or an angry phone call isn't so bad after all.
Anyone else? I remember reading that in the history book, actually. Yeah. Anyone else? Nothing? Who is going to the OCFA event on the 23rd? I am. Anybody else? You are? Anyone else? Okay. And of course, Roma starts on Sunday through, I think it finishes on Wednesday, right? Or it finishes on the Tuesday? I know I'm leaving on the Tuesday, but I couldn't remember what. Okay, Sunday through Tuesday. And from here, Councillors Finch, Deputy Mayor Grigg, and myself are going, I think. Okay. All right. Closed meeting session, there is none. Confirmatory bylaw. Councillor Finch.
That bylaw 0325, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held January 15th, 2025, be read a first, second, and third time this January 15th, 2025, and further that the mayor clerk are hereby to authorize, sign, and same they affix the corporate seal thereto.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And motion to adjourn? Councillor Finch.
Moved by Finch, seconded by Mitchell, that this session of council be now adjourned and herewith closed at 11:35, and that the next meeting of council be held February 5th at 9:30 a.m. in the council chambers of the Zorra Municipal Center.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And we are adjourned.